Well, Apple has discontinued the iMac Pro, which has only existed since 2017. If you're not familiar with the iMac Pro, it was the stopgap between the 2013 Mac Pro and the 2019 Mac Pro. It was kind of like you want ice cream, but your mom's like, oh, it's not dinner time yet, but you can have this Werther's Original. No one really wants it, but sure, you'll take it just because. You might as well have it while you're waiting for the ice cream, and that's what we're doing today. We're talking about the Werther's Original of Mac computers. So let's go ahead and check it out. And welcome to another sensational Sunday. I'm Mike, and yes, this week we're talking all about the iMac Pro. So if you haven't heard, Apple has officially discontinued it. It was supposed to be a quiet discontinuation in reality, but when asked about it, they said, yes, we are in the process of phasing it out. There will not be any more produced, and there will not be any more new models. Now, the iMac Pro is a little bit weird because it's a product that got discontinued only after one iteration. I mean, there were several different options for it, but there was only one iMac Pro that came out in December of 2017, which really isn't that long ago. It's a little over 3 years old, and they've already killed it off. But it's also not surprising considering that it was pretty much DOA. I mean, other than a price drop a few years ago, and by price drop, I mean they got rid of the base model and made the 10-core model the $5,000 like the base model was. So it's kind of like a price drop slash, upgrade to the base model, which wasn't an upgrade because it was already an existing model. But other than that, we hadn't really heard much about the iMac Pro for the last few years. So is it surprising that Apple's discontinuing it? No. Is it surprising that Apple made it in the first place? A little bit, but we have to look at where Apple was when the iMac Pro came out. And to look at that, we have to look at how bad the 2013 Mac Pro was. So the 2013 Mac Pro, if you don't remember, was the little trash can one. Personally, I love the way that computer looks. Like, it looks so cool. Like, even today, I think it's a cool looking computer. And while it does look cool, clearly, those parts in 2013 were not ready for something that small, because that thing was on fire all the time. That's pretty much why it was such a big deal for Apple to come out with a new Pro machine, because that 2013 Mac Pro was so awful. The thermal envelope was so awful. Everybody hated it. The people that they made it for hated it, so they really needed to come out with something new. Now, they were getting a lot of backlash about the Mac Pro. Now, this is important because the release of the iMac Pro is really weird. And I have my personal beliefs that the iMac Pro was supposed to be the continuation of the Pro machine, that they were just going to phase out the traditional desktop completely and go with the iMac Pro. But before the iMac Pro even released, they announced that they were working on a new Mac Pro, and they kind of apologized in the Apple way by not apologizing. Them making a new Mac Pro was apologizing. That's how Apple apologizes. They're going to make a new product to fix it, just like with the butterfly switch keyboard. They never officially apologized for it. They just went ahead and made a better keyboard. And then they have the replacement program and all that stuff. So they're not going to come out and outright apologize for anything. But if they make a product to replace an old product with a new design that's drastically different, they're admitting that they messed up. So yeah, so in 2017, before the iMac Pro came out, they were kind of like, we're working on a new Mac Pro. And to me, that was like, okay, well, this product's gonna be DOA, because if they're working on a new Mac Pro and they're also releasing an iMac Pro this year, I feel like the people who needed that machine are gonna obviously wait for the Mac Pro, which came out in 2019. So what was Apple's strategy here? Was it to have this all-in-one iMac Pro and then have the Mac Pro as like another option, but really push the iMac Pro? Obviously not. I really think that they already had the iMac Pro in development. I don't think they were going to do another traditional desktop like they had done before, but by the time they went to go release it or announce it, there was so much backlash from the Pro community. I feel like if they hadn't announced that they were working on the Mac Pro, a new one, like an actual desktop, when they released the iMac Pro, they would have pretty much lost that community. I feel like they were already close to losing that Pro community anyway, because they had to deal with that trash can Mac for 4 years at that point. And I think if they would have just announced the iMac Pro, that would have just been donezo, game over. Even though the iMac Pro does have better thermals than that trash can Mac, but it's still an all-in-one. Like that's fine for consumer hardware, but the people who are really paying this much money, they kind of want something that can breathe. But yeah, I don't think that the pros would have been pleased if that was just what they got after complaining about bad thermals, especially because it was an all-in-one, so you have an unnecessary monitor that you might not even want or need that's built in. To make it even more clear that they didn't care about the iMac Pro, by 2019, the 2019 27-inch iMac was already there as far as performance. There were still some benefits to having the iMac Pro, like 10 gig Ethernet and ECC memory, but if you didn't need those things, it was starting to make less sense. Then by 2020, the 27-inch iMac had got so many updates. The only reason you would buy an iMac Pro is if you need ECC memory. And that was pretty much it. Like, that was the writing on the wall. Like, it was going away. And of course, by 2019, the Mac Pro had already came out. So I feel like as soon as the Mac Pro came out, the iMac Pro really became an afterthought. And I feel like in Apple's mind, it was already an afterthought after they released it. Also, we can't forget to mention that Apple's in the process of moving away from Intel and over to their own silicone. So they haven't transitioned all their products yet. They've just got the MacBook Pro, like the 13-inch, the MacBook Air, and the Mac Mini. So they still have to do the MacBook Pro, the bigger MacBook Pro, and the iMac. So obviously they're going to come out with some more powerful version of the M1. Probably, it might not even be called the M1. Who knows what they're going to call their desktop processors? It might be the D1 for desktop. I don't know. It sounds kind of sexual, so maybe not. I don't see Apple being the type of company that's going to have that many different SKUs of a desktop processor, where it makes sense to have like the 27-inch iMac and the 27-inch iMac Pro, when that could just be one computer. And then if you want your Pro machine, then go out and spend the money for a Mac Pro. So I just think all these things line up. It kind of makes sense that the iMac Pro was never going to be around for that long. And honestly, I just feel like it's one of those things that was still a prosumer machine. Like, yeah, it was an iMac Pro, but it was really a consumer machine, which the 2019 Mac Pro, unforgivably, is for professionals. Like, if you're dropping that much money, you better have a use for this computer. And that's pretty much the statement that Apple made. They realized that, no, professionals don't want the iMac Pro. They do want this desktop, but they're going to pay for it. And everybody else, consumer hardware is good enough where you don't really need a computer like that. And I think Apple's right. I mean, I don't think that Mac Pro should be as expensive as it is, but Apple overall is right. Like, consumer hardware can get you a long way. Even prosumers, most of them use consumer hardware. So unless you have specific needs, most people don't need a Mac Pro. They can spec up either an iMac or even a Mac Mini or a MacBook Pro and they'll be fine. So this was the most obvious RIP I've ever seen because it was pretty much DOA to begin with. All right, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to tell a friend, tell a coworker, like, share, and subscribe, and always do at least 2 things at the same time.